The camera pans over a cramped Boston apartment. Clothes scattered across the floor, empty medication bottles on a nightstand, and dozens of crumpled papers surrounding an exhausted young man. Ethan Collins stares at the ceiling, his eyes red, from crying yet alive with a frenetic energy that won't let him rest. "I've been awake for 3 days straight," Ethan's voice narrates. "The thoughts won't stop. They're brilliant and terrifying all at once. Yesterday I was a genius. Today I'm falling apart." That's what they don't tell you about bipolar disorder. You can be drowning and flying at the same time. The scene shifts to Ethan watching an interview where Marcus Wells, Hollywood's most enigmatic star, discusses his critically acclaimed role as a character with bipolar disorder. "I tried to bring truth to the role," Marcus says on the screen, a subtle pain behind his practiced smile. Mental illness shouldn't be invisible. Ethan's hand trembles as he writes a letter, tears blurring the ink. "Dear Mr. Wells, I don't expect you'll ever read this, but your portrayal saved my life last week. I wondered if you could help save it again." What happens when desperation meets compassion? When a letter meant to be a final goodbye becomes an unexpected beginning? Stay with me to discover how one chance meeting changed 2 lives forever. Boston in autumn painted the city in amber and crimson, but Ethan Collins couldn't appreciate the beauty around him. The morning light filtered through half-drawn blinds in his 1-bedroom apartment in Allston, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air and the chaos that had accumulated during his latest depressive episode. The radiator clanged and hissed, fighting against the October chill that seeped through poorly insulated windows. Ethan sat on the edge of his unmade bed, staring at the orange prescription bottle in his hand. The small white pills rattled as his fingers trembled. 3 months ago, he'd stopped taking them during a manic upswing, convinced he'd found clarity without medication. Now, as the crushing weight of depression returned, the cycle felt painfully familiar, the same mistake he'd made countless times since his diagnosis 7 years ago. The scent of 3-day-old Chinese takeout lingered in the air, mixing with the musty smell of unwashed clothes. Outside, car horns punctuated the morning rush hour, each sound piercing Ethan's heightened senses like physical pain. His phone buzzed again, the 5th call from his supervisor at the graphic design firm where he'd missed 3 deadlines during his manic episode, when he'd abandoned paid projects to pursue a revolutionary app idea that now seemed embarrassingly grandiose. "Just take the damn pills," he whispered to himself, his voice rough from lack of sleep. The bitter taste as he swallowed them without water was almost comforting, a reminder that he was trying, even if no one else could see the effort it took. His sister Mia had called yesterday, her voice tight with the familiar mix of concern and frustration. "You can't keep doing this, Ethan. Mom and Dad are worried sick. Just let us help you." But how could he explain that their help felt like drowning in another way? The careful tones, the walking on eggshells, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Why can't you just be normal? Ethan dragged himself to the shower, letting scalding water run over his body. The bathroom mirror revealed a stranger, a 26-year-old man with 3 days of stubble, dark circles under once bright blue eyes, and cheekbones too sharp from weight loss during his latest episode. He barely recognized himself anymore. The eviction notice sat on his kitchen counter, the final warning highlighted in yellow. His laptop screen showed his bank account balance, $237.18. Not enough for rent, not enough to move, not enough to start over. Again. As he dressed for what would likely be his termination meeting, Ethan's gaze caught on the movie poster tacked to his wall. Marcus Wells in his award-winning role as Daniel Hayes, a brilliant architect with bipolar disorder. The film had been the first time Ethan had seen his own struggles portrayed with such raw honesty on screen. He remembered sitting in the dark theater, tears streaming down his face as the character articulated feelings Ethan had never been able to put into words. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor. "Meeting moved to 2 p.m. HR will be present." Something inside Ethan broke. A sudden clarity cut through the fog of depression. He couldn't do this again, couldn't restart. The cycle of hope and failure that had defined the past 7 years. He needed help, real help from someone who might actually understand. In a moment that hovered between desperation and inspiration, Ethan turned to his laptop and began to write a letter to the one person who had made him feel less alone, even if that connection existed only through a silver screen character. "Dear Mr. Wells," he typed, his fingers moving with unexpected steadiness. "I don't expect you'll ever read this. If you've ever felt misunderstood like Ethan, hit subscribe to follow this incredible journey." The Starbucks on Boylston Street hummed with midday energy as Ethan hunched over his laptop, the termination papers from his now former employer folded and stuffed into his backpack. Steam rose from an untouched coffee as his fingers flew across, the keyboard pouring 7 years of struggle into words. Outside, rain began to fall, transforming Boston into a watercolor painting of blurred lights and reflections. "I'm writing this letter knowing it will probably be read by an assistant, if anyone," Ethan continued typing. "But your portrayal of Daniel Hayes was the first time I saw myself reflected honestly on screen, not as a punchline or a tragedy, but as a human being fighting an invisible war." Ethan paused, aware that his writing bordered on the manic energy he was trying to control. Yet this felt different, purposeful rather than chaotic. The ambient chatter of the coffee shop faded as he focused on choosing his words carefully. Mia slid into the seat across from him, her concerned expression softening as she pushed a sandwich toward her brother. "You need to eat something," she said, studying his face. At 29, Mia had become more mother than sister since their parents had moved to Florida 3 years ago, unable to handle the emotional toll of Ethan's condition. "I'm writing to Marcus Wells," Ethan said without looking up. Mia's eyebrows rose. "The actor? Ethan, is this—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Is this a balanced decision?" The question stung, a reminder that every action, every emotion was scrutinized through the lens of his diagnosis. "It's not a symptom, Mia. I researched him." "Did you know his foundation has donated millions to mental health research? There's something personal there, beyond the role." Indeed, Ethan had spent hours digging through interviews and charity records. Marcus Wells was notoriously private about his personal life, but his Marcus Wells Foundation had quietly become one of the largest private funders of mental health initiatives in the country. Yet the actor rarely spoke about the foundation's work in interviews, a contradiction to the typical celebrity charity publicity machine. "Even if he never reads it, I need to do this," Ethan said, meeting his sister's gaze. "I need to believe someone who understands might help." Mia reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Then make it count," she said simply. For the next hour, Ethan refined his letter. He described his diagnosis at 19, how it had derailed his promising future as a graphic designer, the medications that dulled both pain and creativity, the relationships destroyed by his unpredictable behavior. He explained how Wells's performance had captured the experience of bipolar disorder with unexpected accuracy, the racing thoughts, the crushing depressions, the moments of clarity that felt like glimpses of who he could have been. "I'm not asking for money," Ethan wrote. "I'm asking for guidance. How do I build a life around this disorder instead of watching it tear down everything I try to create? How do I make people understand I'm not my diagnosis while acknowledging I need help managing it? I've lost 3 jobs in 2 years. I'm about to lose my apartment. But what hurts most is losing faith that my life can be more than this constant cycle of destruction and rebuilding." Ethan included his email address and phone number, then hesitated over how to send the letter. Celebrity mail went through layers of management and assistance. His message would likely never reach its intended recipient. "I have an idea," Mia said, watching his expression. "Remember Casey from college? She works in production now, in Boston this week for that new Wells movie shooting downtown." Hope flickered in Ethan's chest. A real connection, however tenuous, felt like the universe offering a lifeline. That afternoon, Mia made the call. Casey couldn't promise anything but agreed to try to pass the letter along to someone in Wells's team. 3 days later, Ethan printed the final version on heavy cream paper, his hands steady as he folded it into an envelope. The simple act felt ceremonial, a message in a bottle cast into the vast ocean of celebrity with only the faintest hope it might reach its destination. What Ethan couldn't know as he handed the envelope to Mia, who would give it to Casey, was that his words would soon travel much further than he imagined, and that Marcus Wells had reasons of his own for paying attention to this particular message when it arrived. If you've ever reached out in desperation, hoping someone would understand, subscribe now to see what happens when your call is actually answered. The November air carried the first hint of winter as Ethan waited outside the Ritz-Carlton, shifting his weight from one foot to another. The elegant building loomed above him, its windows reflecting the gray Boston skyline. 2 weeks had passed since he'd written the letter, 2 weeks of silence that had gradually eroded his fragile hope. Yet here he stood, clutching a coffee cup more for warmth than caffeine, based on a cryptic text from Casey. SW entrance 10 a.m. Say nothing to anyone. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled to the curb. The rear door opened, and a woman in her 40s with a severe bob and sharper eyes emerged. She scanned Ethan with a calculating gaze. "Ethan Collins?" she asked, her voice clipped and professional. Ethan nodded, suddenly aware of his thrift store peacoat and scuffed boots. "I'm Diana Winters, Mr. Wells's personal assistant. You have 20 minutes." She gestured to the open door. "Your letter made quite an impression." The surreal quality of the moment wasn't lost on Ethan as he slid into the vehicle's leather interior. Seated across from him, dressed in jeans and a simple gray sweater that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, was Marcus Wells. In person, the actor seemed both more and less than his screen presence. Shorter, perhaps, but with an intensity to his hazel eyes that cameras never fully captured. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, his voice lacking the polished quality it had in interviews. "Your letter, it wasn't what I expected." Ethan's carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. "I didn't think you'd actually read it." A small smile touched the actor's lips. "Neither did my management team. Diana was supposed to send a form response and donation to a mental health charity in your name." He glanced at his assistant, who remained expressionless. "I review certain correspondence personally." The car began moving through Boston traffic, offering glimpses of the public garden through rain-streaked windows. The soft patter of raindrops created an intimate atmosphere inside the vehicle. "Your portrayal of Daniel Hayes," Ethan began, finding his voice. "How did you get it so right? The scene where he's trying to explain to his wife why he can't just calm down." "My brother," Marcus said, the words hanging in the air between them. Then, with a glance at Diana that contained an entire conversation, he continued. "What I'm about to tell you hasn't been shared publicly. My younger brother had bipolar disorder, undiagnosed until it was too late." The simple statement carried the weight of untold grief. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. "I'm sorry." Marcus nodded, looking out at the city. "It was 17 years ago. Michael was brilliant, creative, so much potential. But in the 90s, mental health wasn't discussed the way it is now. My parents thought he was just difficult, rebellious." His voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened as he clasped his hands. "He was 19 when he took his life. I was 22, just getting my first real roles." The confession hung in the air, unexpected and raw. Ethan understood the gift of trust he was being offered. "That's why the foundation," Ethan said softly. "Why you took that role." Marcus turned back to him. "After I read your letter, I had Diana do some research. You're talented, Ethan. Your portfolio online, your design work shows remarkable vision." Ethan flushed. "When I'm manic, yeah, but I can't sustain it. Can't meet deadlines when depression hits. What if you could work differently, on your own schedule, with understanding of your condition?" For a moment, Ethan thought he'd misheard. "That's not how the real world works." "Perhaps it should," Marcus replied. "The foundation is launching a new initiative, creative works focused on mental health awareness. We need designers who understand the experience firsthand." Diana cleared her throat. 10 minutes, Marcus." "Right." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I can't solve everything, Ethan, but I can offer you a chance. Freelance design work, healthcare coverage through the foundation, flexibility during episodes." The offer seemed suspended between them like something fragile and impossible. Ethan felt the familiar rise of emotion. Was this hope or the beginning of another manic episode? The distinction had blurred so many times before. "Why me?" he finally asked. "You must get thousands of letters." Something flickered across Marcus's face, a shadow of old pain quickly controlled. Because 17 years ago, Michael wrote letters too, to actors, musicians, anyone he thought might understand what he couldn't express to us. No one answered. Through the window, Ethan watched Boston pass by, the city where he'd struggled, failed, and somehow survived. The same city where opportunity now appeared in the most unexpected form. "I'm not offering charity," Marcus continued. "This is a professional opportunity, but one with support built in. All I ask is that you consider sharing your story eventually. On your terms, when you're ready." As the SUV circled back toward their starting point, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not the dangerous electricity of mania or the weight of depression, but something steadier. Something like possibility. "I'd like to try," he said finally, his voice stronger than it had been in months. Neither man could have predicted how those 4 simple words would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not only their lives, but countless others. And the most breathtaking parts of the story were still waiting to unfold. If you're beginning to feel invested in Ethan's journey, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. December arrived with swirling snow and holiday lights. That seemed too bright during Ethan's darker days. His new apartment, secured with the first month's payment from his contract with the Marcus Wells Foundation, felt both liberating and terrifying. The spacious one-bedroom in Cambridge offered a small office nook with a window overlooking the Charles River, a far cry from his previous cramped quarters, yet the emptiness sometimes echoed with his doubts. Today was a good day, though. Ethan's medication had been adjusted by the specialist Marcus had connected him with, Dr. Eleanor Chen, whose patient roster included several high-profile clients requiring absolute discretion. The new prescription dulled the edges of his condition without completely flattening his creative energy. Ethan studied the mood-tracking app on his phone, another tool in his expanding arsenal against the disorder. 14 days of relative stability, a record in recent years. His phone chimed with a text from Diana. "Conference call with M at 2 p.m., project review." These bi-weekly calls had become a fixture in Ethan's new routine. Despite his initial skepticism, Marcus had proven genuinely interested in both his design work and his well-being. Their conversations often strayed from professional matters to discussions about living with mental illness, Marcus sharing insights from his brothers, journals which he'd kept private for years, and Ethan offering the lived experience that gave those written words context. At precisely 2 p.m., Ethan's laptop came to life with the video call. Marcus appeared on screen, his location revealing a hotel room rather than his usual office. "Sorry for the backdrop," Marcus said. "We're wrapping the Chicago shoot." "How's it going?" Ethan asked, still slightly disbelieving that casual conversations with Marcus Wells had become part of his normal life. "Brutal schedule, but we're nearly finished. I wanted to check on the awareness campaign designs before the holiday break. Diana says you've submitted several concepts." Ethan shared his screen, walking Marcus through the designs for the Foundation's new initiative, a national campaign addressing mental health stigma in creative fields. What had begun as a simple freelance project had evolved into something more substantial as Marcus recognized Ethan's talent. "I'm particularly proud of this concept," Ethan explained, displaying a series of portraits that revealed different aspects of the same face, representing the multifaceted nature of mental health challenges. The tagline, "Beyond the Mask," speaks to how people with mental illness often present differently than they feel. Marcus studied the design, his expression thoughtful. "It's powerful, Ethan. You've captured something essential here." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "There's something else I'd like to discuss. The Foundation is organizing a private retreat in February. Artists, writers, musicians, all living with mental health conditions. A weekend of workshops, connections, support. I'd like you to attend. perhaps lead a session on visual expression of invisible struggles. Ethan's heart raced at the thought. "I'm not qualified to teach anyone." "Your work suggests otherwise," Marcus countered. "But more importantly, your perspective is valuable. Many of these people are at earlier stages of their journey with their conditions." The conversation shifted to logistics, but Ethan's mind was stuck on the invitation. Public speaking triggered his anxiety, and the thought of being surrounded by strangers, even understanding ones, made his chest tighten. As if reading his thoughts, Marcus added, "Consider it at least. No pressure. I'll be there the entire weekend." After the call ended, Ethan sat quietly by the window, watching snow accumulate on the branches of a barren oak tree. The old Ethan would have immediately declined, retreating to the safety of isolation. But something had shifted in the weeks since that first meeting in the SUV. His phone rang, Mia checking in as she did every other day. "Marcus wants me to speak at some retreat," he told her after their usual exchange. "That's fantastic." Her enthusiasm bubbled through the phone. "Ethan, do you realize how far you've come in just a month?" Had it been only a month? It felt simultaneously longer and shorter, a strange time dilation effect of finally moving forward after years of cycling in place. "I'm not sure I'm ready," he admitted. "No one ever feels ready," Mia said softly. "But you weren't ready to write that letter either, and look what happened." That evening, as Ethan prepared dinner in his new kitchen, actually cooking rather than ordering takeout, another small victory. His phone chimed with an email notification. The Foundation's quarterly newsletter, typically sent only to major donors and partners, had been forwarded by Diana. Scrolling through the document, Ethan froze at a section titled 17 Years, A Brother's Promise. There, in print, was a brief but honest account of Michael Wells's struggle with bipolar disorder and his death by suicide. Marcus had never spoken publicly about this chapter of his life, yet here it was. Raw vulnerability from a man who guarded his privacy fiercely. The final paragraph read, "The work of the Foundation honors Michael's memory by creating the support systems he needed but couldn't find. Every person reached is a promise kept." Ethan sat at his kitchen table, food forgotten, as the weight of this disclosure settled over him. Marcus wasn't just helping him out of generic kindness or guilt. The actor was entrusting him with a deeply personal mission. With trembling fingers, Ethan composed a text. "I'll do the retreat." Marcus's response came minutes later. "Thank you. It matters more than you know." As snow continued to fall outside his window, Ethan felt the tentative foundation of something he hadn't experienced in years, purpose beyond survival. The retreat wasn't just about helping others, it was about reclaiming pieces of himself he'd thought lost to the disorder. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. The January wind whipped across Boston Harbor, carrying ice crystals that stung Ethan's cheeks as he walked along the waterfront. His therapist had suggested daily walks, regardless of weather, to establish routine and manage anxiety. 3 weeks had passed since he'd agreed to speak at the retreat, and preparation for his session had become both a focus and a trigger. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from Dr. Chen. "Medication check tomorrow, 1 p.m., bring your mood charts." Ethan grimaced. The past week had been challenging, a low period that wasn't quite depression but hovered uncomfortably close. He'd missed 2 design deadlines, necessitating awkward calls with Diana to request extensions. She'd been understanding, but the familiar shame of unreliability had returned like an unwelcome visitor. Approaching a bench overlooking the gray, choppy water, Ethan spotted a figure already seated there, hunched against the cold. With a jolt of surprise, he recognized Marcus, who wasn't expected in Boston until next week. "Ethan," Marcus acknowledged with a nod that suggested their meeting wasn't coincidental. "Diana mentioned you walk here most afternoons." "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, noting the unusual tension in the actor's posture. Marcus gestured to the empty space beside him. As Ethan sat, He noticed the actor's reddened eyes and the subtle tremor in his hands that spoke of exhaustion or something deeper. "Today's Michael's birthday," Marcus said quietly. "He would have been 36. Understanding dawned. "I'm sorry. Do you usually come to Boston?" He loved this city, wanted to attend MIT. Marcus pulled his coat tighter. "Each year I try to go somewhere he loved, do something he would have enjoyed." The vulnerability in this ritual struck Ethan deeply. Marcus Wells, whose carefully constructed public image revealed nothing of his private pain, was allowing him to witness this annual pilgrimage of grief. "Diana mentioned you've been struggling this week," Marcus continued, changing the subject. With practiced ease, Ethan stiffened slightly. "It's nothing serious, just a down cycle. I'll catch up on the work." "I'm not concerned about the deadlines," Marcus said. "I'm concerned about you pushing too hard. The retreat can wait if you're not in a good place." The genuine concern in his voice made something crack in Ethan's carefully maintained composure. "I don't want to disappoint you," he admitted, the words escaping before he could filter them. Marcus turned to face him fully, surprise evident in his expression. "Is that what you think this is about? Meeting my expectations? Isn't it?" Ethan challenged, months of question finally surfacing. "You're investing in me because I remind you of Michael. You're trying to save me because you couldn't save him." The words hung in the frigid air between them. Marcus didn't flinch, but something shifted in his eyes, a recognition that cut deeper than offense. "You're partly right," he acknowledged after a long moment. "Your letter reminded me of him. But this isn't about saving you, Ethan. It's about creating opportunities I believe Michael should have had." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The foundation has helped dozens of people in situations similar to yours. I don't personally mentor them all." "Then why me?" The question that had lingered since their first meeting. Marcus stared out at the harbor. "Because you weren't asking to be saved. You were asking to be understood." He turned back to Ethan. "Do you know how rare that is? Most people want money, connections, quick fixes. Your letter asked for guidance on building a life around your condition, not escaping it." The distinction landed heavily in Ethan's chest. He'd spent years focusing on what bipolar disorder took from him, rather than how to build something meaningful within its constraints. "I spoke with Dr. Chen this morning," Marcus continued. "She mentioned your medication might need adjustment. That's normal, Ethan. It doesn't mean failure." Ethan's throat tightened. "It feels like I'm back at square one." "Recovery isn't linear," Marcus said, echoing words from Ethan's therapy sessions. Michael had a good analogy in his journals. He described bipolar disorder as learning to sail in unpredictable waters. You can't control the weather, but you can learn to read the signs, adjust your sails, find safe harbors during storms. The metaphor resonated in ways clinical descriptions never had. Ethan had been treating each mood shift as a personal failing rather than conditions to navigate. "The retreat participants aren't expecting perfection," Marcus added. "They're looking for honest navigation through difficult waters. Your current struggles might make your guidance more valuable, not less." As they sat in companionable silence, watching the winter sun begin its early descent, Ethan realized something profound. Marcus wasn't trying to fix him. The actor was simply holding space for his journey, offering resources without demanding specific outcomes. "There's something else," Marcus said eventually. "Something I've never told anyone about Michael's death." The weight of the impending confession hung between them. Ethan remained silent, offering the same space he'd been given. "I was supposed to meet him that weekend, canceled because of an audition." Marcus's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened. "He called, sounded strange. I told myself it was just his usual drama. The audition was for my first major role, the one that launched my career." The bitter irony wasn't lost on Ethan. Success born in the shadow of ultimate loss. "I don't tell you this to burden you," Marcus continued, "but to explain why authenticity matters so much to me now. The foundation, the retreat, supporting people like you. It's not charity or guilt. It's about creating the community Michael needed. As they walked back along the harbor, the cruel wind now at their backs, Ethan felt a shift in their relationship. The pedestal he'd placed Marcus on had crumbled, revealing something more valuable, a fellow human navigating his own pain while trying to create meaning from tragedy. "I'll see you at the retreat," Ethan said as they prepared to part ways. Marcus nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Adjust your sails, Ethan. The storm always passes eventually." If this conversation between Ethan and Marcus has touched you, make sure to subscribe to follow their continuing journey. The Berkshire Mountains in February presented a postcard-perfect winter landscape. Pristine snow blanketing rolling hills, bare trees etched against steel blue skies, and the sprawling cedar lodge that would host the Foundation's creative retreat. Set on a private estate, the location promised both luxury and seclusion for the 20 participants arriving from across the country. Ethan stood at the window of his assigned cabin, watching his breath fog the glass as anxiety coiled in his stomach. Despite medication adjustments and weeks of preparation with his therapist, the prospect of leading tomorrow's workshop left him nauseous. The revised mood tracking app on his phone showed warning signs: decreased sleep, racing thoughts, the familiar electricity that preceded either brilliance or breakdown. A knock at the door pulled him from his spiraling thoughts. Diana stood outside, clipboard in hand, her perpetually efficient demeanor softened slightly by the casual sweater that replaced her usual tailored suits. "Settling in okay?" she asked, stepping inside at Ethan's gesture. Her gaze swept the room, noting his unpacked suitcase and the pill organizer open on the nightstand. "Marcus wanted me to check on you before tonight's welcome dinner." "I'm fine," Ethan said automatically, the response worn smooth from years of use. Diana's expression suggested she wasn't convinced. "You don't need to be fine, Ethan. That's rather the point of this weekend." She consulted her clipboard. "Your session isn't until tomorrow afternoon. Marcus thought you might want to attend as a participant first, get comfortable with the group." The consideration in this planning touched Ethan. "Where is Marcus? I thought he'd be here by now." Something flickered across Diana's face, concern quickly masked by professional composure. "There's been a situation with the press. Someone leaked information about the retreat, including Michael's story." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What? How?" "We're investigating, but several outlets are running stories connecting Marcus's recent mental health advocacy to his brother's suicide. His publicity team is in damage control, but..." She hesitated. "It's bringing up a lot for him. He'll be late, but he'll be here." The news hit Ethan with unexpected force. Marcus had entrusted him with this deeply personal history, and now it was being splashed across tabloids without context or consent. Diana checked her watch. "Dinner's at 7. Your medication reminder is set in the retreat app we installed, correct?" Ethan nodded, though in truth he'd silenced the notifications that morning, irritated by their intrusion. After Diana left, he paced the cabin, checking social media against his better judgment. Marcus Wells' brother was already trending, with speculative pieces and so-called inside sources offering increasingly sensationalized versions of Michael's story. By the time Ethan entered the main lodge for dinner, his anxiety had morphed into a protective anger on Marcus's behalf. The great room buzzed with excited conversation as participants, musicians, visual artists, writers, and performers mingled around a fireplace large enough to stand in. Ethan recognized several faces from the Foundation's materials, all creative professionals managing various mental health conditions. A young woman with vibrant blue hair approached, hand extended. Kayla Torres, Bipolar 2, and apparently the only other person under 30 here. You must be Ethan Collins. Her directness was refreshing. How did you know? Diana pointed you out. Said you're leading tomorrow's visual expression workshop. Kayla studied him with artist's eyes. You look like you're about to bolt. First retreat? Ethan managed a small smile. That obvious? My third Foundation event, she confided. Gets easier, though usually Marcus is here playing charming host from the start. He's been delayed, Ethan said carefully. Kayla's expression suggested she knew more than she was saying. Press stuff, yeah. Shame about the timing. Throughout dinner, Ethan found himself watching the entrance, anticipating Marcus's arrival. The actor's absence left a noticeable void, particularly as participants shared stories of how the foundation had supported their work. Each testimonial hammered home what was at stake, not just for Ethan, but for the community Marcus had carefully built. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan returned to the main lodge. The cavernous room was empty, the fire reduced to glowing embers. He sat in one of the oversized leather chairs, trying to organize his thoughts for tomorrow's workshop. The retreat app pinged with a medication reminder he'd missed hours earlier. The sound of the door opening broke the silence. Marcus entered, looking more exhausted than Ethan had ever seen him. Snow dusted his coat, and the shadows under his eyes spoke of more than just travel fatigue. "You should be sleeping," Marcus said, his voice hoarse as he noticed Ethan. "So should you." Ethan hesitated, then added, "Diana told me about the press leak." Marcus shed his coat, dropping it uncharacteristically carelessly over a chair before slumping into the seat across from Ethan. 17 years of privacy gone in a day. They're calling tomorrow morning. Want an exclusive about Michael? The bitterness in his voice was new, a crack in the composed facade Marcus typically maintained. "Are you going to give it?" "My publicist thinks I should. Control the narrative before speculation gets worse." He ran a hand over his face. "They're already suggesting I've been hiding some dark family secret, that Michael's condition was somehow shameful to me." The injustice kindled Ethan's earlier anger. "That's bullshit. You've dedicated your life to mental health advocacy because of him." "Privately," Marcus corrected. "That was the point. Real change, not publicity stunts." Ethan leaned forward. "Maybe it's time for the work to be more visible. The foundation has created something extraordinary here. These people's lives are genuinely better because of what you've built." "It's not enough," Marcus said, so quietly Ethan almost missed it. "It will never be enough." The raw admission hung in the air between them. For the first time, Ethan saw clearly the weight Marcus carried. Not just grief for his brother, but an impossible self-imposed penance. No number of people helped would ever balance the one person he couldn't save. "I skipped my evening meds," Ethan confessed suddenly. "I've been skipping the afternoon dose for 3 days. The side effects were flattening everything I needed for the workshop." Marcus looked up sharply. "Ethan, I know it was stupid. I'm telling you because you're honest with me, and I want to be honest with you." Ethan took a deep breath. "You can't save everyone, Marcus, not even with unlimited resources and the best intentions. Some of us will make bad decisions, have setbacks, even knowing better." The parallel to Michael hung unspoken between them. "What can I do?" Marcus asked finally. "For me? Nothing. I'll call Dr. Chen in the morning, get back on track." Ethan held his gaze steadily. "For yourself? Consider that maybe the public knowing about Michael isn't a betrayal. Maybe it's the next step in the work you've been doing all along." As the embers died in the fireplace, casting the room in darkness save for a single lamp, something shifted between them, the helper and the helped exchanging roles in the fluid way of true connection. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. "Now take your meds and get some sleep. Some of us have workshops to teach tomorrow." The gentle teasing signaled a return to more familiar ground, but something had fundamentally changed. As Ethan headed back to his cabin, the weight of tomorrow's workshop seemed lighter somehow. The expectation of perfection had been replaced by something more valuable, the understanding that vulnerability itself was the gift he had to offer. If you're feeling the emotional weight of their connection, hit subscribe now to see how this critical moment changes everything. Morning sunlight transformed the retreat's snow-covered grounds into a dazzling spectacle that hurt Ethan's eyes as he made his way to the main lodge. After a dawn call with Dr. Chen, who'd adjusted his medication protocol with a mixture of professional, concern, and personal understanding, he felt more centered than he had in days. The workshop materials he'd prepared were tucked under his arm, journals, art supplies, and printed excerpts from Michael's journals that Marcus had permitted him to share anonymously. The lodge buzzed with activity as participants gathered for breakfast before the day's first sessions. Ethan scanned the room for Marcus but saw only Diana, deep in conversation with retreat staff near the buffet tables. She caught his eye and beckoned him over. "Marcus is doing the interview," she said without preamble, her tone neutral but her eyes conveying more. "He asked that you proceed with your workshop as planned. He'll join when he can." Ethan nodded, surprised by the decision yet somehow not surprised at all. "When?" "10 minutes ago. Phone interview with the Atlantic." Diana checked her ever-present tablet. "Your session has 14 registered participants. Room 3, East Wing. Need anything?" The business-like exchange was Diana's way of maintaining normalcy, but Ethan caught the faint worry lines at the corners of her eyes. "He's okay?" Her professional mask slipped momentarily. "He's doing what he needs to do." The morning passed in a blur of workshops and conversations. Ethan attended a session on creative writing through depressive episodes, finding unexpected comfort in the structured exercises. By the time his own workshop approached, the anticipatory anxiety had transformed into something more productive, a focused energy he recognized as the constructive side of his condition when properly managed. Room 3 filled quickly, not just with the registered participants, but several others who'd heard about the session through the retreat grapevine. Ethan arranged journals and art supplies at each place, the familiar routine of preparation calming his nerves. "Welcome to Visualizing the Invisible," he began, his voice steadier than he'd expected. "I'm Ethan Collins. I've been living with bipolar disorder for 7 years, though sometimes it feels like it's been living with me." The small joke earned understanding chuckles, breaking the ice. For the next hour, Ethan guided the group through exercises designed to externalize internal experiences, color mapping mood states, creating visual metaphors for medication effects, illustrating the experience of moving through different phases of mental health conditions. "The challenge isn't just explaining our experiences to others," he explained as participants worked. "It's understanding them ourselves. Creating external representations gives us distance and perspective." He circulated through the room, offering encouragement and observations, discovering in himself a natural ability to connect with others through their creative expression. When the door opened quietly halfway through the session, Ethan glanced up to see Marcus slip into a chair at the back, giving him a subtle nod of approval. As the workshop concluded, to enthusiastic feedback, participants lingered to share their works and exchange contact information. Ethan found himself surrounded by people who spoke his language, not just the vocabulary of mental illness, but the deeper dialect of creative resilience. When the room finally emptied, Marcus approached, examining the visual examples Ethan had created for the workshop. "These are remarkable," he said, studying a particularly striking piece that depicted the bipolar experience as a landscape of extreme topography. "You should consider exhibiting them." "How did the interview go?" Ethan asked, carefully packing away supplies. "It's done." Marcus's tone was neutral, but his posture had changed, a subtle unburdening that spoke of relief. "They're running it as a feature on mental health advocacy rather than a celebrity expose. I told Michael's story on my terms." "That can't have been easy." "It wasn't." Marcus helped gather scattered art materials. "But you were right last night. Maybe the next phase of this work needs to be more visible." They walked together toward the main lodge, snow crunching beneath their boots. The winter air was sharp with pine scent from the surrounding forest, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. "There's something else I need to tell you," Marcus said as they paused at a scenic overlook. "Something I've been working on for the past month since your workshop was confirmed." Ethan turned, curious. "The foundation is launching a new initiative. A creative agency staffed entirely by professionals with mental health conditions. Flexible schedules, comprehensive support, meaningful projects. We'll start with 5 positions." Marcus looked directly at Ethan. "I'd like you to be the creative director." The offer hung in the crisp air between them. Ethan felt his heart rate accelerate. I'm not qualified for that. Your portfolio and today's workshop suggest otherwise. Marcus gestured toward the lodge. So do the connections you've already made here. You understand both the creative process and the unique challenges our target employees face. It's too much responsibility, Ethan protested, the familiar fear of failure rising. What if I can't handle it? Then we adjust. Build in the supports you need. Marcus's expression softened. This isn't about finding someone perfect, Ethan. It's about creating a workplace model that accommodates human reality, including mental health conditions. As they continued toward the lodge, Marcus outlined the vision, a studio that would produce foundation materials while accepting select commercial clients, demonstrating that accommodating mental health needs was compatible with professional excellence. The framework included flexible scheduling, comprehensive health benefits, on-site therapy, and peer support systems. You've been planning this for months, Ethan realized suddenly. Before you even met me. Marcus nodded. The concept, yes, but finding the right person to lead it has been the challenge. Previous candidates had the credentials but lacked the lived experience, or they had the experience but weren't ready to be public about their conditions. The scope of what Marcus was offering gradually dawned on Ethan. Not just a job, but a platform to create the kind of workplace he'd always needed. A chance to build something that might show others what was possible. I'll need to think about it, he said finally. Of course. Marcus checked his watch. Take the weekend. Observe the retreat. These are the kinds of people who might work with you, or for you. That evening, as participants gathered for a communal dinner, Ethan found himself the center of unexpected attention. Word of his workshop had spread, and several people approached to share how his exercises had helped them articulate long-standing struggles. From across the room, he caught Marcus watching these interactions with quiet satisfaction. The actor raised his glass in a subtle toast when their eyes met, then returned to his conversation with one of the musicians in residence. Later, unable to sleep, Ethan called Mia. He's offering me a job, he said after explaining the situation. Creative director of a new agency. That's incredible! His sister's enthusiasm beamed through the phone. Are you going to take it? Ethan stared at the ceiling of his cabin, considering the question that had kept him awake. I'm not sure I'm ready. Maybe that's the point, Mia said softly. From what you've told me about Marcus, he's not looking for ready-made success stories. He's creating spaces for people to become their own success stories. The insight struck a chord. Throughout the retreat, Ethan had witnessed the Foundation's approach, not fixing people, but creating environments where healing and growth could occur naturally. When did you get so wise? He asked his sister. Her laugh warmed him across the digital distance. About the same time you got brave enough to write that letter. As the retreat concluded on Sunday, Ethan found Marcus at the same overlook where they'd spoken about the job offer. The actor was alone, seemingly lost in thought as he gazed across the winter landscape. I'll do it, Ethan said without preamble. With conditions. Marcus turned, eyebrows raised in question. I want to start small. 3 employees plus. Me. I want to build slowly. Do it right. Ethan took a deep breath. And I want to create an annual scholarship in Michael's name for design students managing mental health conditions. For a moment, Marcus seemed at a loss for words, emotion flickering across his typically composed features. I think he would have liked that very much, he said finally, voice slightly rough. As they shook hands, formalizing an agreement that would change both their lives, neither man could fully comprehend how far the ripples of their connection would spread. The agency was just the beginning of something much larger, a silent sacrifice that had finally found its voice. If this moment of transformation has moved you, subscribe now to see how Ethan and Marcus build something revolutionary together. April in Boston brought tentative green to city parks and a symbolic rebirth that matched Ethan's evolving life. 3 months had passed since the retreat, and Wellspring Creative Agency had moved from concept to reality with breathtaking speed. Today marked the official opening of their offices in a renovated warehouse in South Boston, industrial bones softened by abundant natural light, plants, and thoughtfully designed workspaces. Ethan stood in what would be his office, running his hand along the custom desk that accommodated standing or sitting positions. The wall calendar displayed color-coded project timelines alongside scheduled therapy sessions and dedicated recovery days, a revolutionary approach to workplace planning that acknowledged the rhythms of mental health conditions. "What do you think?" Diana asked, appearing in the doorway. Her role had expanded to include oversight of the agency's integration with broader foundation initiatives. "It's surreal," Ethan admitted. 3 months ago, I was unemployed and facing eviction." Diana smiled, a rare, full expression that transformed her usually serious face. "Marcus has a talent for spotting potential. The team arrives at 10 for orientation. Nervous?" He was, but not in the familiar, overwhelming way that had previously derailed opportunities. This nervousness felt productive, the natural anticipation of beginning something meaningful. The team had been carefully selected: Kayla Torres from The Retreat, whose digital illustration work had already gained recognition in gaming circles; James Chen, a copywriter whose anxiety disorder had previously limited him to freelance work; and Rivera Martinez, a photographer whose depression had interrupted a promising career. Each brought exceptional talent alongside their mental health challenges, the exact combination the agency was designed to nurture. At precisely 10, they gathered in the central meeting area, a comfortable space with couches and chairs arranged to facilitate conversation rather than hierarchy. Ethan had prepared meticulous onboarding materials, but found himself setting them aside in favor of a more authentic approach. "Welcome to an experiment," he began, his voice steady. "We're building something that doesn't quite exist yet. A creative agency that treats mental health as part of the human experience rather than an inconvenience to be hidden or overcome." For the next hour, they discussed not just projects and expectations, but coping strategies, communication preferences during different mental states, and how to recognize when a colleague needed support versus space. The conversation flowed, with surprising ease, free from the stigma and secrecy that had characterized most of their previous workplace experiences. "This feels too good to be true," James commented as they toured the facility, which included a quiet room for overstimulation, a small gym, and a fully stocked kitchen. "When does the other shoe drop?" "We'll have challenges," Ethan acknowledged. "Deadlines will still exist. Clients will still have expectations. But we're building in the flexibility and support to navigate those realities without sacrificing wellness." Their first projects were internal foundation materials, annual reports, donor communications, and content for mental health awareness initiatives. Marcus had wisely created a runway of guaranteed work while they established their processes and rhythms as a team. By June, those processes were being tested by their first external client, a progressive tech company interested in more inclusive workplace practices. The project represented both opportunity and pressure, a chance to prove their model had commercial viability beyond the foundation's support. Ethan monitored his team closely during this period, watchful for signs of strain. He'd established weekly individual check-ins and implemented a traffic light system where team members could indicate their current capacity without detailed explanations. Green for fully operational, yellow for proceeding with care, red for needing accommodation. The system proved its worth when Rivera hit a depressive episode midway through the project. Rather than hiding his struggle or pushing through at personal cost, the pattern in his previous jobs, he signaled red and triggered their established protocol. Responsibilities shifted temporarily, support was mobilized, and the project continued with minimal disruption while Rivera focused on recovery. "This actually works," he marveled during his check-in with Ethan once he'd stabilized. "In my last position, that episode would have cost me my job." Ethan understood completely. His own bipolar disorder remained a constant presence, but its impact had transformed within the supportive structure they'd created. Episodes became manageable shifts in workflow rather than catastrophic derailments. The difference wasn't in the condition itself, but in the environment responding to it. Marcus visited monthly, more as mentor than overseer. During his July visit, he and Ethan walked along the Boston Harbor waterfront, the same path where they'd had their heart-to-heart months earlier. The tech company has referred 2 more clients to us, Ethan reported. Both specifically requested our team because of our approach to mental health, not despite it. Marcus nodded, pleased but not surprised. How are you managing the growth? Carefully, Ethan smiled. We're establishing firm capacity limits and being selective about clients. Quality over quantity. And personally? Marcus asked, the question carrying the weight of genuine concern. The dual responsibilities of creative work and leadership? Ethan considered the question honestly. Better than I expected. Having purpose beyond just managing my condition has been transformative. The structure we've created doesn't just accommodate mental health needs, it actually supports recovery and growth. They paused at a viewpoint overlooking the harbor, summer sunlight dancing across the water. Sailboats dotted the horizon, reminding Ethan of Marcus's sailing metaphor for navigating bipolar disorder. The interview you gave, Ethan said, changing the subject. It's having an impact beyond what you might have expected. The Atlantic piece had indeed sparked a larger conversation. After its publication, several other high-profile individuals had come forward with their own mental health stories, creating a cascade effect in public discourse. The foundation had seen a substantial increase in donations and partnership inquiries. Michael would have been 37 next month, Marcus said quietly. Sometimes I wonder what he would think of all this. The scholarship recipients might give us a clue, Ethan suggested. The Michael Wells Design Scholarship had launched with 3 recipients, promising students managing various mental health conditions while pursuing creative education. Their thank you letters had been profoundly moving, speaking to the isolation they'd felt before finding this targeted support. Marcus nodded, emotion briefly visible before he collected himself. We're announcing the agency publicly next month. The Foundation Board wants to feature your team's story as a case study in workplace adaptation. The prospect of such visibility would have terrified Ethan 6 months ago. Now, he felt ready. Not because his condition had changed, but because his relationship with it had evolved. We'll need to protect the team's privacy, he noted. Let them choose their level of disclosure. Of course, Marcus agreed. But your leadership on this, Ethan, being openly bipolar while demonstrating exceptional creative direction, it matters. It changes the narrative. As summer turned to fall, Wellspring Creative Agency continued to evolve. They added 2 more team members, established more robust processes, and began earning industry recognition for both their work and their workplace model. Ethan's own design contributions had grown stronger, his creative voice finding new clarity within the stability of the structure he'd helped build. In September, he received an unexpected email from his former supervisor at the design firm that had fired him less than a year earlier. The message expressed regret for how his condition had been handled and inquired about consulting with Wellspring on more inclusive practices. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan, but neither was the opportunity to create change in a workplace that had once rejected him. Full circle, Mia commented when he shared the email during their weekly dinner. Are you going to do it? Ethan considered the question. I think so. Not out of vindication, but because it's the work we've set out to do, changing how creative workplaces approach mental health. His sister studied him across the table, a soft smile playing at her lips. Do you realize how different you are from the brother who was facing eviction last year? Who thought his life would never be more than cycles of destruction and rebuilding? The observation struck Ethan forcefully. He was different. Not because his bipolar disorder had disappeared or even dramatically improved, but because he'd stopped defining himself primarily through its lens. The condition was part of him, but no longer the dominant narrative of his life. Later that week, during his monthly call with Marcus, Ethan broached a subject he'd been considering for some time. I'd like to connect with Michael's journals. Again, not just the excerpts you shared for the workshop, but more of his writing. If you're comfortable with that. The request was significant, a deeper link to the story that had begun their unlikely connection. Any particular reason? Marcus asked, his tone careful but not resistant. The scholarship recipients have formed a support group, Ethan explained. They've asked me to facilitate occasional discussions. Michael's perspective, especially as someone who didn't have proper treatment or support, could be invaluable context for them. The silence on the line stretched long enough that Ethan wondered if he'd overstepped. Then Marcus cleared his throat. I think he would have wanted that, his words helping others directly. Another pause. I'll have copies made of the relevant sections. As October arrived, bringing crisp air and spectacular foliage to Boston, Ethan stood at the window of his apartment overlooking the Charles River. 1 year had passed since he'd written that desperate letter. A year that had transformed not just his own life, but created ripples affecting dozens of others through the agency, the scholarship, and the foundation's expanded visibility. His phone chimed with a text from Marcus. The Today Show wants an interview, both of us, discussing mental health in creative fields and the agency model. Thoughts? A year ago, the very idea would have seemed impossible. Beyond impossible. Unthinkable. Now it felt like the natural next step in a journey that was continuously unfolding in unexpected ways. When do they want to film? He texted back.
If this journey of transformation has inspired you, subscribe now to witness the breathtaking culmination of Ethan and Marcus's story. November brought early snow to Boston and final preparations for the Today Show interview that had expanded
into a full segment on mental health innovation. The Wellspring Creative Agency had become something of a case study in workplace adaptation, attracting attention from business publications and mental health advocates alike. Ethan stood in his apartment, adjusting his tie as Mia offered running commentary on his appearance. The interview would film tomorrow at the agency offices, a decision that had been carefully made to showcase the environment they'd created, rather than placing the team in a standard television studio. You're going to be great, Mia assured him, brushing invisible lint from his shoulders. Just be yourself. Which self? Ethan joked, though the question carried a kernel of genuine concern. Manic Ethan? Depressive Ethan? Balanced Ethan? Human Ethan, his sister answered firmly. The one who's built something important. His phone rang, Marcus calling from his hotel. The actor had arrived in Boston that morning for pre-interview preparations. Change of plans, Marcus said without preamble, his voice carrying an unusual tension. Can you meet me at the foundation office? There's something you need to know before tomorrow. The urgency in his tone sent a spike of anxiety through Ethan. Everything okay? Just need to talk, in person. An hour later, Ethan found himself in the Foundation's Boston headquarters, a modest suite of offices that belied the organization's substantial impact. Diana met him in the reception area, her expression unreadable as she led him to a conference room where Marcus waited. The actor stood at the window, silhouetted against the gray November sky. On the conference table lay a worn leather journal that Ethan recognized as one of Michael's from the retreat workshop materials. What's going on? Ethan asked, the tension in the room palpable. Marcus turned, his expression serious but not alarming. Before we do this interview tomorrow, there's something you should know. Something I should have told you months ago. Diana cleared her throat. I'll give you privacy. No, Marcus said, surprising both of them. You should stay. You've kept this secret long enough. Now thoroughly confused, Ethan took a seat at the table. Marcus joined him, pushing the journal forward. After Michael died, he began, I found this among his things. His last, always, though she'd transitioned to foundation leadership after proving herself an exceptional advocate and organizer. Mia appeared at Ethan's side, resplendent in a midnight blue gown. Mom and Dad just found their seats, she reported. Their parents had flown in from Florida for the ceremony, a significant step in their ongoing reconciliation process. The documentary had helped them understand their son's condition in ways years of attempted explanations hadn't achieved. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice carried from the stage, please welcome Marcus Wells and Ethan Collins, representing the Wellspring Initiative. The applause washed over them as they walked onto the brilliantly lit stage. Ethan had grown accustomed to public speaking over the past year, but this moment felt different. a culmination of a journey neither man could have predicted from its desperate beginnings. At the podium, Marcus began their joint address. 7 years ago, a young man with bipolar disorder wrote a letter asking for help. 2 years before that, another young man with the same condition wrote a similar letter that arrived 3 days after he took his own life. I'm here tonight because of both those letters. The audience grew silent, many familiar with their story but still captivated by its telling. The Wellspring Initiative didn't begin as a grand vision, Marcus continued. It began as an attempt to answer a letter that arrived too late, to create for one person what my brother needed but couldn't find: understanding, opportunity, and community that accommodated his condition without being defined by it. He turned to Ethan. Their practice transitioned smooth as he ceded the podium. What began as one person helping another has evolved into something neither of us could have imagined, Ethan began, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath his words. The agency model we're being recognized for tonight isn't revolutionary. In concept, it simply acknowledges the reality that mental health conditions are part of the human experience, not barriers to contribution and creativity. As he outlined the practical structures they'd developed, flexible scheduling, integrated support, normalized communication about mental health states, Ethan scanned the audience. In the third row, he spotted Kayla, James, and Rivera, his original team members who had become leaders in their own right. Behind them sat several scholarship recipients, including Michael Jeng, the brilliant design student whose portfolio had reminded Ethan so strongly of Marcus's brother that reviewing it had brought tears to his eyes. The most powerful aspect of our model isn't the policies or the benefits, Ethan continued. It's the culture of authentic humanity. When we remove the need to hide or overcome mental health conditions and instead build systems that accommodate them, we unleash potential that would otherwise remain locked away. Marcus returned to the podium for their conclusion, placing a hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture of partnership that had become familiar over their years of collaboration. Tonight's recognition is deeply meaningful, he said, but the true measure of our work isn't in awards or acclaim. It's in the lives transformed, including our own. Their prepared remarks complete, Ethan expected Marcus to conclude. Instead, the actor paused, seeming to make a spontaneous decision. There's something else I'd like to share tonight, Marcus said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. Something I haven't told anyone, including my friend and partner in this work. Ethan looked at him in surprise, their carefully rehearsed presentation taking an unexpected turn. For 17 years, I've carried my brother's last journal with me everywhere, Marcus continued, reaching into his jacket to produce the familiar worn leather book. It has been both burden and guide, a reminder of what was lost and what might still be created from that loss. The audience was utterly silent, the unexpected intimacy of the moment holding them rapt. Tonight, I'm breaking that pattern, Marcus said, turning to Ethan. Because tonight, I'm giving this journal to the Michael Wells Scholarship Fund to be shared with recipients as a source of insight and connection. My brother's words finally finding the audience he was seeking. The significance of this gesture struck Ethan with physical force. The journal had been Marcus's most personal link to his brother, carried close for nearly 2 decades as both talisman and penance. Michael's story doesn't end with his death, Marcus continued, his voice steady. Despite the emotion behind his words, it continues through every person helped by the systems his absence inspired us to create. Through every scholarship recipient who finds support he couldn't access. Through every employee at Wellspring who can bring their whole selves to work, without fear or shame. He held up the journal. This is no longer just a record of what was lost. It's become a blueprint for what can be built. As Marcus handed the journal to Ethan on stage, a symbolic transfer that would become one of the most shared images from the evening, the audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to release 17 years of carefully contained grief and purpose into something new and transcendent. Later that night, after the ceremony and reception, Ethan found himself on the hotel balcony overlooking the illuminated monuments of Washington. The December air was crisp but not bitter, the city lights reflecting off low clouds to create a dome of soft radiance above the Capitol. Marcus joined him, 2 glasses of celebratory champagne in hand. "Sorry for the unscripted moment," he said, passing one to Ethan. "It felt like the right time." "It was perfect," Ethan assured him, still processing the significance of the gesture. "You've carried that journal since before I was diagnosed, since before I even knew what bipolar disorder was." They stood in companionable silence, watching the distant figures of late-night visitors moving around the Lincoln Memorial. "When I wrote you that letter," Ethan said finally, "I was looking for a way to survive. I never imagined finding a way to thrive." Marcus nodded, understanding the distinction. That's the difference between treatment and transformation, between accommodating a condition and building a life that integrates it. "Do you think Michael would be proud?" Ethan asked, the question he knew Marcus still asked himself. "I think he would be relieved," Marcus answered after careful consideration. "To know that his struggles created something lasting, that his voice was finally heard, even if not in the way he hoped." Below them, the city continued its nighttime rhythm, people moving between moments of significance, connections forming and dissolving, lives intersecting in ways that would only be understood in retrospect. "What's next?" Ethan asked, not just for conversation, but because he genuinely wanted to know where their shared mission would lead. Marcus smiled. The expression reached his eyes in a way that had become more common as the years of their friendship deepened. "We've answered the letters, built the agency, created the scholarships." He turned to face Ethan directly. "Maybe now we start writing new letters, reaching out rather than just responding." The idea resonated with unexpected force, a shift from reactive to proactive purpose, from creating what had been missing to imagining what might yet be possible. As they raised their glasses in a toast to both the past and future, Ethan felt the fullness of the journey that had brought him to this moment. 7 years ago, his diagnosis had seemed like the end of possibility. 3 years ago, his desperate letter had been a last grasp at hope. Today, he stood not despite his condition, but with it fully incorporated into a life of meaning and impact. The breathless moment wasn't a single dramatic revelation or achievement. It was the accumulated transformation of pain into purpose, isolation into community, and desperation into determination. It was the recognition that even the darkest experiences could become sources of light when shared with courage and received with compassion. As Washington slept beneath them, 2 men who had been connected by parallel letters written years apart stood witness to what that connection had created, not just for themselves, but for a growing community who would carry their work forward in ways neither could yet imagine. The true breathless moment wasn't something that could be packaged into a dramatic climax or viral headline. It was the quiet miracle of lives transformed through authentic recognition. The simple, profound truth that being truly seen is the beginning of all healing. If this story has touched your heart, subscribe and share to spread this message to those who need it most. Every story of hope matters, and yours could be next. Journal. I couldn't bring myself to read it for almost a year. When I finally did, he opened the journal to a marked page, turning it toward Ethan. The handwriting was similar to what he'd seen in workshop excerpts. Somewhat chaotic, but legible, the words of a mind moving faster than the pen could follow. "Page 37, Marcus directed. The entry from September 14th, 2000. Ethan read silently, heart pounding as the words registered, "Sent another letter today." Actor this time. Marcus Wells from that new medical show. Saw him in an interview talking about his cousin with depression. Maybe he'll actually respond. 17 letters now, no answers. Starting to think no one wants to hear from the crazy kid. Dad says to stop watching TV, focus on getting better. How exactly? No one who understands will talk to me. No one who doesn't understand will listen. Ethan looked up, meeting Marcus's gaze. "He wrote to you." Marcus nodded, the weight of 17 years evident in his expression. "One of many letters I never saw. My fan mail went through the studio then. Form responses to everything. But his letter arrived 3 days after he died. The timeline haunted me. While I was giving a standard interview about a cousin who merely had depression, not bipolar disorder, my brother was reaching out directly. and I never knew. The revelation shifted Ethan's understanding of their entire relationship. That's why my letter affected you so deeply. The parallels were impossible to ignore, Marcus confirmed. Not just the condition, but the age, the creative potential, the desperate reach for connection. When I read your letter, it was like being given a second chance I never expected. Diana spoke softly from her position by the door. The foundation was originally created to process and respond to similar letters, before it evolved into what it is today. Every initiative we've launched, Marcus continued, every program we've developed, they all stemmed from that original failure. What might have helped Michael? What support was missing? How could systems change to catch people before they fall through the cracks? Ethan sat with this new understanding, pieces clicking into place. You weren't just helping me because I reminded you of Michael. You were answering the letter you never got to answer for him. Yes. The simple confirmation carried years of grief and purpose. Why tell me now? Ethan asked. Before the interview? Marcus closed the journal carefully, because tomorrow they'll ask about our connection, how this all began. The public story has been that your letter found me through standard channels, that I responded out of general compassion for your situation. But that's not the full truth. You want to tell the real story on national television, Ethan realized. Only if you're comfortable with it. This is your story too now, not just mine and Michael's. The responsibility of this narrative weighed heavily. Ethan considered the implications, not just for himself and Marcus, but for everyone who might see themselves in their intertwined journeys. The scholarship recipients, he said finally. The agency team. Everyone who's found hope in what we're building. They deserve the honest foundation of this story. Marcus nodded, relief visible in his features. That's what I hoped you'd say. The next morning, as the Today Show crew transformed the agency's central space into a temporary studio, Ethan found himself surprisingly calm. The team gathered for a pre-interview meeting where he and Marcus shared the complete story of their connection, including Michael's letter. That's why this place exists, Kayla realized, looking around at the agency they'd built together. We're all answers to that letter in a way. The observation carried profound weight. What had begun as one man's attempt to atone for a missed connection had evolved into a community of support and purpose that now extended far beyond its origins. When the cameras finally rolled, Ethan and Marcus sat side by side, the agency, team positioned behind them as living proof of their model's success. The interviewer, a respected journalist known for thoughtful coverage of mental health issues, began with standard questions about the agency's structure and success. Then came the question they'd prepared for. This partnership between you two seems to go beyond professional collaboration. How did it begin? Marcus met Ethan's eyes briefly before turning to the camera. It began with 2 letters, written 17 years apart. My brother Michael, who had undiagnosed bipolar disorder, wrote to me shortly before he died by suicide in 2000. That letter arrived 3 days too late for me to help him. Then last year, Ethan wrote a very similar letter, reaching out during his own mental health crisis. As Marcus shared the full story for the first time publicly, Ethan watched the interviewer's professional composure momentarily slip in the face of such unexpected candor. The crew behind the cameras grew still, captivated by the narrative unfolding. When I read Ethan's letter, Marcus continued, it felt like being given a second chance I never thought possible. Not to save my brother. That opportunity was lost, but to honor what he needed by creating it for someone else. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he found the words coming naturally. What began as a desperate reach for help has become something neither of us could have imagined. The agency, the scholarship program, the workplace model we're developing, they're all answers to both our letters. Proof that connection can transform pain into purpose. As the interview concluded, the journalist asked one final question. What would you tell someone who's struggling right now, feeling as alone as both Michael and Ethan once did? Ethan and Marcus exchanged glances, silently deciding who should answer. Ethan nodded slightly, indicating Marcus should take the lead. I would tell them what I wish someone had told my brother, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. That isolation is an experience, not a sentence. That reaching out, even when previous attempts have been met with silence, is an act of courage worth continuing. And that somewhere, there is someone who will recognize your voice when they hear it, even if that someone isn't who you initially reached toward. As the cameras stopped rolling and the crew began dismantling their equipment, Ethan felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with his desperate letter had come full circle, not ending where it began, but spiraling upward to a new level of understanding and purpose. Diana approached, tablet in hand as always. The Foundation. Board watched remotely. They're moved and supportive of the full disclosure. Marcus nodded, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. Good, no more secrets. Later that evening, as snow fell softly outside the agency windows, the team gathered with Marcus for an impromptu celebration. Not of the interview itself, but of the truth it had finally brought into the open. The revelation had somehow strengthened, rather than undermined, what they'd built together. To Michael, Ethan said, raising his glass in the quiet gathering, whose letter finally got its answer. To Michael, the others echoed, even those who had never known him understanding his central importance to their shared story. As Marcus met Ethan's gaze across the room, a wordless understanding passed between them. What had begun as one man's attempt to atone for a missed connection had evolved into something far more significant, a living legacy that would continue to grow beyond both their original intentions. The truth, unexpected as it was, had not diminished their journey, but illuminated its deeper purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight they stood in the snow-hushed space they'd created together, witnessing the power of connection to transform even the deepest loss into lasting meaning. If this revelation has moved you, subscribe now for the final chapter that will truly leave you breathless. 1 year after the Today Show interview, Ethan stood backstage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., adjusting his bow tie with nervous fingers. The annual Mental Health Innovation Awards had selected the Wellspring Creative Agency as this year's Workplace Model honoree, and in 10 minutes, he would address an audience that included legislators, healthcare leaders, and mental health advocates from across the country. You've got this, Marcus assured him, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, but remarkably relaxed for someone about to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award at only 44. Just speak from experience, like we practiced. The past year had unfolded with breathtaking momentum following their televised revelation. The interview had gone viral, spawning countless articles, discussions, and a documentary that chronicled the Foundation's evolution and the agency's revolutionary approach. Unexpected doors had opened. Congressional testimony on mental health policy, consulting opportunities with major corporations, and a book deal for Ethan to share his journey from crisis to leadership. Wellspring had expanded to 15 employees, across 3 cities, each location maintaining the core model of comprehensive support and flexibility around mental health needs. They'd developed a certification program for other workplaces, creating ripple effects far beyond their direct operations. More personally meaningful to Ethan was the Michael Wells Scholarship Program's growth to 12 recipients annually, creating a growing network of young creative professionals beginning their careers with support systems he could only have dreamed of 7 years ago. 5 minutes, Diana called, tablet in hand as